Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Reds Rundown podcast, hosted by two lifelong Reds fans and journalists. I'm Rob, he's Joe, and we appreciate you taking the time to join us today, especially after a long break. It's been a little bit since we have had a chance to talk to you guys since the Terry Francona signing. Very excited about that still, to be honest with you. I wondered if that would wear off, but, with the winter meetings going on, with a couple things happening, Joe and I thought it was a good time to get back on, and we'll announce at some point our schedule for next year. We don't know exactly when we're going to be coming back to a weekly basis, so hopefully you will continue to check us out over on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or over on our YouTube channel. But Joe, we always start with, how are you doing today, man? How's life? What's up?
Doing good. It's bowl season for me, college football articles, but
Yep.
it's good to have through the winter months where the days get shorter, having a little bit of hope for your baseball team. I guess we had that last
Yeah.
year in some regards, but obviously that didn't pan out. But I think have some good things to talk about today and get us excited for baseball season next year.
Yeah, no, there's no doubt about that, and I think the Reds are doing stuff that I don't think we've seen the Reds do in a long time, Joe. So I want to start episodes now with letting you guys know what's going to be coming. So we're going to be talking about the coaching staff. We're going to be talking about the India trade and the Singer trade, obviously. We're going to talk about Nick Martinez, and then we're going to talk about all the rumors and things that we're hearing at the winter meetings. So make sure you guys stick around to check out all of that. But we're also going to start still with our question of the day. Let us know, how do you feel about the Jonathan India and Brady Singer trade in the comment section below? Do not worry. We know that Joey Weimer was also traded, but it's just not as much of a topic for us. We will still talk about it, but I think obviously the major portions of that being Jonathan India and Brady Singer, we will talk about that and the Reds rotation because I have some thoughts on that as well, Joe, with everything that we're hearing. But we've got a lot to go over today, so we're going to stop wasting time. Like we said, let us know in the comment section below. Also, make sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. If you enjoy Reds content, we are going to consistently be putting more out, especially at the start of next year. So make sure that you guys are checking back for that. But let's pop on over here, Joe, to the Reds coaching staff, which did get announced. We already knew that Terry Francona was going to be the manager. I'm going to list off some of the more notable names specifically, and then I think we'll kind of dive into it. There are a lot of ancillary pieces, assistant coaches, bullpen catcher, that kind of stuff that got announced too, but we're not going to worry about that too much. I will say too, Joe, I haven't heard anything about the minor leagues in terms of coaching staff changes at the moment, so I'm assuming there will be some here over the next few months, but for right now, we're going to focus on the MLB staff. You got Terry Francona as your manager, and then this is a first for me, Joe. Two bench coaches. The Reds are keeping Freddie Benavides, which is just wild that this man has now survived, I think it's 4 different tenures, right? I believe he was with Dusty Baker initially, made it through Brian Price, got to David Bell, and now is part of Terry Francona's management staff. That man must be one of the most beloved people in the Reds organization. I've heard he's a great guy, so pretty crazy. He's also going to be their fielding coordinator, which is interesting considering how rough our fielding has been. So I don't know if he's taking that over from somebody or not, but we'll go through that. And then, of course, Brad Mills follows Terry Francona pretty much everywhere, it seems like. Had his opportunity to be a head coach, didn't necessarily work out, but he does bring a lot of experience, and he is Terry's guy. So, it was almost assumed that he was going to be the bench coach, but we got 2 now. A bit of a surprise, but coming over from the Cleveland Guardians, Chris Valleca, former Red, is now going to be the hitting coach. Got some interesting thoughts on him. They do keep Derek Johnson, something that I think both Joe and I were hoping they'd at least consider. He will be the pitching coach. Then Colin Cowgill also will be staying as the running coordinator and first base coach, and J.R. House will stay as the catching coordinator and third base coach. Joe, I'm going to pass this topic off to you first. Are there any individuals you want to name? Do you want to talk about the coaching staff as a whole first? Where are you at?
It's a very, very large question. I will say that I'll start with saying, hey, this is a good coaching staff. I like how they mixed some of the old with Terry Francona's new guys who are coming in. There's a lot of baseball knowledge coming in. I do think this is one of the better coaching staffs in all of baseball. If you kind of break it down and look at every position, that is not to say that the Reds will definitely be a playoff team. It's not to say the Reds will be that good. I think they can get the most out of this talent. But after last year, we're obviously wondering how much that talent actually is to us, and how much things are going to go. I think there's been, from what I've seen, good conversations between some of these guys on the back channels that we've seen come out in interviews. So I'm excited. I have some notes about specific ones going forward, but just as a whole, I think this is a very good coaching staff. And I usually, as we talked about last year, Rob, usually think managers, I mean, there might be five that I think they're impactful in baseball. And even for every position that you see, there's maybe 5 or 6 hitting coaches or 5 or 6 pitching coaches every year that are like good, and everyone else is just kind of a run of the muck. So I actually do like this coaching staff quite a bit.
Yeah, I think overall, that's where we're starting, and I think that's a great place to start. I think this coaching staff is outstanding, honestly. I think they took the best parts of David Bell's staff and kept them. I know a lot of people have some issues with J.R. House specifically at third base, but he is considered to be one of the best catching coaches in all of baseball. So I have no issue with him sticking around, and so that was the only name that I would, I guess, point out in my overall look. But I guess one person I did forget to mention as well is Mike Napoli, former first baseman hitter, pretty big power hitter as well, is on the staff. We don't know exactly what role yet, but he is there helping the Reds as well. But back to my thoughts on the overall staff. Joe, I was thinking about this a lot, like right before we hopped on, because I knew this would be a big topic of conversation for us, because I do believe that managers are pretty impactful. I think a good staff will have an impact in, let's say, about 20 games a year, right? Where they're going to really help you decide the outcome of a game, right? Whether it's with a good, switch of, a pitcher, right? Like who's coming in, who's coming out, right? Whether it's a good decision to run the base, whether it's a good decision to actually be sent home. All of these things combined, I would say, and I may be even underestimating it, but at least 20 times a year. Last year, it felt like David Bell's coaching staff cost them all 20 of those games at different points. I know I'm exaggerating a little bit, but it was probably close to like maybe they helped them win 3 out of those 20 and the 17 were not, right? Those games are very important when you think about it, right? Those 20 games can be the difference between being a playoff team and winning a division potentially and not. And I think that this is a type of coaching staff where you can at least expect that they're going to get 10 of those games, which is a 7-game improvement, which would put the Reds, I believe, at 84 wins and right either at or close to a playoff spot. So I think that it's very impactful. They got, I think, some really good guys to come in here. And let's be honest, when you look at Terry Francona specifically, right, this guy is a winner. The last 2 teams he has brought to at least a World Series, right, which is pretty insane, like bringing the Guardians to then Indians to the World Series and winning 2 with Boston, especially breaking the curse. Now, I know that 2014 was already pretty stacked, but if you watch the documentary, they attribute a lot of the reason why they were able to get over the hump to Terry Francona. And I think that managers as well, very specifically, and I think good coaching staffs as well, really matter a lot more in the playoffs as well than they do even in the regular season. So I'm personally a big fan of this. I think the hitting was a massive problem. I did see, it's really funny that Joel McKeithen did get signed by the White Sox, which I think is absolutely hysterical. That staff was already not very good, so we'll have to see what happens over there. See maybe if it really was just a David Bell problem. But I do think that they will have a bigger impact than maybe people think. And I think it's going to, if it can at least be an average, coaching staff, then I think this Reds team is going to be at least 6 or 7 games better, which is, I think, massive when you think about the rest of the talent for the team.
Yeah, I think this coaching staff is probably top 5 in the league. If, this is a lot of ifs here, but if Terry hasn't lost a step, if the new and old staff kind of mesh together, going into more of like the specifics of this, I don't have many thoughts about, first and third base coaches coming back, Cal, Gill, and House.
Yeah.
we saw Terry say that they need to be more accountable and have more base runners be more accountable next year. So I expect there to be from those guys and the players more accountability. So that's going to be good. I don't have too much with Freddie Benavidez. Mike Napoli's role is kind of up in the air right now, so it's hard to say what kind of impact he's going to have. But I will say the meshing of Brad Mills, Freddie Benavidez, two good minds for Terry to lean on. Brad Mills has been with him every step of the way he's ever been, other than when he got his own chances to be manager. Here's the other thing. I think the two most important things on this staff, other than Terry Francona, Chris Valaika, the hitting coach, has done a very good job. Now, he was not a good hitter himself when he played for the Reds as a prospect and with the Reds and then other teams in the majors. But if you can't do, then you teach. Rob, you know that very, very well.
Yep.
I do as well. But I think he did really good with the Guardians, with the Indians when he was there. So I think that is going to be huge. We'll see how he does. And again, I'm not sure if the hitting doesn't come to light this year for some of these guys, that it's his fault. It might just be the players are who they are. But I do expect him to get as much as he can out of them. And then the pitching coach, Derek Johnson, being back, we've liked him for a long time. Maybe not in the terms of wanting him to be manager, but there have already been conversations with that again come out through some of these interviews. Derek Johnson wants to have these starting pitchers ready to throw 100 pitches per game when spring training ends. And Terry Francona said, usually pitching coaches just baby all the pitchers all the time. I'm so happy that he wants to get these guys ready to play at the start of the season. And Rob, I think last year, if we would have had those guys ready, possibly win a couple more games, possibly change the tide of the season. Now, my only concern with that, Rob, because I do like both Valaika and Derek Johnson. One, injuries. Are you going to be able to get the most out of some of the guys we're not expecting you to get the most out of? Like, the starting rotation looks pretty good right now. The hitters we expect to be better, but is Chris Valaika going to help guys like AAA players come up and help hit if we get injuries again? That's going to be huge, and I think something to kind of take note of as we go forward. But I do like those two guys specifically, and I think by the end of the year we could be singing both of their praises as, hey, this is the reason, along with Tito being the manager, this is the reason some of these guys took big step forward.
Yeah, I will say I'm interested to see how the double bench coach works. I want to get that out of the way real quick before I want to hit on the hitting coaches and the pitching coaches as well. I'm really interested to see if they're going to have conflicting opinions at all, how that's going to work. Is Terry going to really use them as true bench coaches, right? Is Freddie just kind of he knows all the players, so they kept him on as that kind of a bench coach, but he's more of the fielding coordinator now? How does that really work? Is Brad Mills actually just the bench coach with Freddie right there? I'm interested to see how that works. I've never, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Joe, but I don't think I've ever seen the Reds have two bench coaches that I can remember. I know that Brian Price, I know, was a pseudo bench coach for a little while under Dusty Baker. I know he had a lot of influence, which is what got him the job, right, when he became, went from pitching coach to head coach. So I'm really interested to see that. I'm going to touch on Derek Johnson, then I have some stats about Chris Valaika, not as a player, but as a coach, that I think is probably the main reason why they brought him in. So Derek Johnson has obviously got the rapport. He has turned a lot of really average pitchers into better pitchers at different points. Now, he's also had some pitchers who have not worked out very well, but I think that he really shone through last year when we saw a lot of the young guys finally actually taking a step forward, right? And I was really happy to see, yes, Lodolo's problem mostly is injuries, but when he's not injured, you could see he had taken the next step. Hunter Green has taken the next step. I think Andrew Abbott is in for a very big season, personally. We saw Nick Martinez really flourish. He's a little bit older, but obviously I think this new pitching style that they were using in terms of how the game was being called, from what we've heard, right, Tyler Stevenson has specifically talked about it as well. He feels very prepared coming into games. And I think we saw that with the pitching. They were the bright spot for almost the entire year until injuries just ravaged the entire team and there wasn't really much you could do about it. So I'm happy that he's staying. I think Chris Valaika is coming for two reasons, Joe. I think one is he's familiar with the Reds. He spent most of his career with the Cincinnati Reds, right, coming up through our system, playing his 2 of the 4 years with the Reds, right? I think that helps at least a little bit. There's a bit of a comfortability factor for Chris Valaika. He's going to know, some of the guys from top to bottom, some of the coaching staffs and stuff like that, right? Some of the behind the scenes guys. That can be very helpful from what we have heard in the past. But one thing that I was looking up, Joe, that I think is extremely important is when he was the coach of the Guardians, when he was the hitting coach of the Guardians, which was from 2022 to 2024, so 3 years, right? The Cleveland Guardians last year ranked 4th in least amount of strikeouts. In 2023, they were dead last in the most, or in amount of strikeouts by a batter. In 2022, they were also dead last in strikeouts. Now, that is not to say, like, when you have a player like Steven Kwan who doesn't really strike out very much, even your power hitters are not big strikeout guys. But it seems as though the approach that the Cleveland Guardians took, and you even saw it with like Jose Ramirez, a lot of guys, they did not strike out as much while he was their hitting coach. And I think that he is much more of a, bat to ball kind of guy. Just make contact and see what happens. Can you imagine a world where Ellie De La Cruz cuts out even 30, 40 strikeouts maybe? That would be probably a lot to ask. But like 25 to 30 strikeouts a season, right? That could be huge for him, right? And if he cuts out even more than that, then Chris Valaika is going to look like an absolute genius, right? So like if you can cut out the strikeouts on guys that have high strikeout numbers, Will Benson being one of them, because it sounds like they're keeping him around. If you can cut it out for even Tyler Stevenson, who I think had a little bit higher strikeout numbers than I remembered and wanted. Like, if you can help them come to the games with a better approach at the plate and a better idea of, hey, in these situations, right, in these types of mindsets, I'm just going to make more contact. That can do a lot for this team, right? They have a lot of natural power. They are very, I think, good hitters. They're just not very polished. And I'm wondering if Chris Valaika is going to be that guy for them. So I'm really excited to see what he can do. I'm not going to lay it all at his feet. Obviously, like you said, I think that, we're going to get to see this year who the players really are, because unlike in the past, we've questioned a lot of what David Bell does. We still may question Terry Francona. I didn't watch those Red Sox and Guardians teams every single game like I will the Reds. But I will say the prevailing theory is he's going to make a lot better decisions. He's good at making informed decisions based on the old school and the new school. And I think that's going to fit this team extremely well. So that was my last thoughts. You got anything else on the coaching staff? And then I think we can hop over to the next section here.
Yeah, I think the things to watch out for, again, is just if these coaching staffs mesh, there could be problems with that. If the players take to the new coaching staff, Terry, is he still locked in at his age, with his health problems, I think that all will be fine. And I think it's important to not judge the coaching staff based on performance maybe in their first couple months. I think it's going to take a lot of time to get through to some of these guys who are used to, maybe David Bell letting a lot of things go. There was not a lot of accountability if you listen to the interviews after he was fired. So there could be some, hey, we need to get guys out of this clubhouse because they're just not fitting what we want to do. There could be a lot of things. I think the biggest thing for kind of dealing with some of these guys, these coaches specifically, is more so watching how things are approached. So you said limiting strikeouts for hitters. That is huge for us. We had David Bell last year telling people, hey, I'd rather you strike out looking than strike out swinging, which is just a cardinal sin in baseball. Now, I do think that you can say, hey, we want to take more pitches, just like Moneyball and everything, take more pitches, see more pitches. And if you strike out looking, it's not the worst thing in the world, but you more so want to go down swinging. You want to put the ball in play. And I think that's something the Guardians teams did do. It seemed like some of the Guardians fans were kind of done with Tito at the end of his leash. But I really do still attribute where they got to the last several years to what he did with that team. And I really, even last year when they played pretty well, I think it was him kind of molding those guys into what they are now. And I think a similar kind of thing could happen this season for the Reds, at least the start of it.
Yeah, and I will say, too, I've heard a lot, and I've seen him talk about it a lot. He said that, especially in those last 2 years, his health was just affecting him so much that he couldn't do his job correctly. And that's why he did step away. And he feels like he's kind of remedied that. So I'm not as concerned about their being upset, because I've also heard a lot of the players talk about how great of a manager he is, right? And how much they loved him and how much he has helped them become better players. I tried to watch as many interviews every time that he talks, although he has a lot of the same talking points, which is very interesting. Just mainly because if people ask the same type of questions, That man answers it almost the exact same way every time. It's very impressive, honestly. But when people get a little deeper and they ask him, more in-depth questions, you can see that side of him that's very strategic. He doesn't seem like he's going to give up a lot in terms of coach speech. It feels like he's just going to kind of be who he is, be entertaining, but kind of keep his cards close to the vest to a certain degree as well. I'm really interested to see how that works out, and I'm very excited. I don't think I've been this excited in my entire life for a coach. Like, I was pumped for Dusty Baker, but this is just a whole other level of prestige in my mind. And that's no insult to Dusty. He's a Hall of Famer. There's no doubt about it. But Terry Francona has done it, right? And he took a pretty okay, Guardians team. I mean, their biggest home run in the end of that series was a Rajai Davis home run. Like, that's how deep, like, down the barrel they ended up having to go, and he was still getting the best out of guys like that, who was like at the very end of his career, right? So I'm really interested to see what they do, and I think the one thing is really the last thing I want to point out before we get into the rumors and the trades and everything is, he keeps saying that he's letting the front office kind of handle that, but I think he has a lot more influence on that than people realize, especially considering what we've been seeing already so far this offseason. I think he is very much laid out what he would like for the team, and he's letting them do their job, but I think that they are very much taking what he wants very seriously. And so I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but I will follow that up with the trade that we ended up making.
Yeah, I don't know if it's like letting them do their jobs as much as it is, hey, he made sure that they were aligned on what they wanted in players, and obviously they came prepared for that meeting with them, and I think they probably see eye to eye on a lot of things, and those comments they made after they fired David Bell about not seeing eye to eye on things and having some arguments about different things, I think maybe they kind of like squash that bug before it could happen and know, hey, we may not agree on every little thing, but for the most part, we have the same philosophy, so you can do your job, I'll do my job, and then we'll kind of split it and do the right thing.
All right, so yeah, moving on here as well, we have Jonathan India and Joey Wiemers getting traded to the Royals for Brady Singer. And this, to me, was, I think, the catalyst, the beginning portion of what we're going to see from the Reds, because once you start seeing these rumors, it is very clear to me that starting pitching is incredibly important. It is potentially going to end up being the most important aspect that the Reds are going to be focusing on, if we're being completely honest here. And yes, giving up Jonathan India, I think, was tough. I think a lot of people are going to be sad about that. Joey Wiemers everybody seemingly is just going to take him as a flyer and hope that he works out. The Reds clearly just didn't feel like he was that guy. Seems like more of a throw-in type of person. But, Brady Singer's an interesting player, Joe. When you look at him, he's had good year, bad year, good year, bad year, good year, right? Or not even bad years necessarily. Like, his only really bad year was 2023, a 5.52 ERA. But, he had a 4.06 ERA in his first season, a 3.23 ERA in his 2022, and then last year a 3.71. But I think the thing that they're most focused on is that he's getting them 180 innings, something that you don't see very often in baseball anymore. They say he's a ground ball pitcher. He still gave up 22 home runs. I think he might be like a 25 to 30 home run guy here in Great American, to be honest with you. But he doesn't have overpowering stuff, but a lot of his stuff moves. He's a very polished guy. He's a very, I think, confident guy. He's not huge strikeouts necessarily either. He did have 170, his highest ever last year. And I'm really interested to see what Derek Johnson is going to do with this guy, because he's a former first-round pick. He's got 2 years of arbitration left. He's got this year and next year. And when you add him to the staff, it makes you wonder. And I'm gonna list off the staff, and then I want to hear your thoughts on this. So you have Hunter Green, Nick Lodolo, Andrew Abbott, now Brady Singer, Nick Martinez. I think that's the only reason why, and we'll talk about him in a second, why they would sign him the way that they did, right? And then a whole smorgasbord of young guys as well. You still have Graham Ashcraft, who will be coming back from surgery, right? You still have Rhett Lauder, who really showed out last year when he was called up. I think that they may not think that he is ready. You still have Brandon Williamson, who will come back some point during the middle of the season from injury. You have the kid whose name is escaping me, who they drafted this last year in the first round. Chase, or no, not Burns. Then you have Chase Petty as well, who has been making his way through the system. You are very, very, very deep right now in the starting pitching market. And I think that with the rumors that we'll go over here later as well, I'm sorry, guys, that we're not discussing this right now, but like they are intent on having as many starting pitchers as possible, Joe. And I'm going to throw this out there as well. I think they may end up looking at a 6-man rotation. I think they may be seriously looking at a 6-man rotation, or at least using Nick Martinez like once, I don't know, every week or so as a starting pitcher, and then having him do bullpen duty as well. I don't know what they're doing exactly, but I love it. You can never have too much pitching, and they are trying to make this the best staff in baseball, at least from an on-paper perspective in my mind.
Yeah, I mean, I'll start with the trade itself. I really liked it. I didn't love it. And the reason being, I think the value of the trade is there for the Reds, right? Like, you get a guy who, at his best, is a very good pitcher, could be one or two, and there's probably two in this rotation, but, you can make an argument for one based on his 2022 season for sure. They're going to have a lot of starting arms, and I like the fact that we're seeing teams like the Dodgers last year. A lot of people think, oh, Shohei's why they won. Shohei was a big reason why they won. They had 2 starting pitching staffs that could beat just about anyone else's starting pitching staff. They had 10 guys that could roll out there as starters.
Yep.
And some of them got hurt. Some of them weren't able to play. Clayton Kershaw was hurt to start the year. But I think they're realizing that. So I really like the trade. But we're also giving up Jonathan India, who... one, team leader. I don't know how much it's going to matter now with Terry Francona there. I think he's the leader, and they'll get other guys to kind of step up and be those leaders. But 2, led the team in on-base percentage last year for qualifying hitters. We know getting on base and batting average was tough. And I think you maybe we're all in on pitching, which is great. But now we're relying on several players to take steps forward after taking steps down last year. And we still have to acquire that hitter. We've been told they want to acquire probably an outfielder, but they don't care what position. They'll put them wherever they want, as long as it's a bat. They still have to do that. The winter meetings are pretty much over. There's still trade talks going on. Don't get me wrong. There's still rumors we're going to get to here in a little bit. But I think you put your team in a pretty big hole on the offensive side of things by doing this trade. I'm not against it, but now you have to convert and get that extra bat, right? And you have to have Matt McClain come back and play well, and CES and Santiago Espinal to follow up a pretty good second half last year, and Candelario step up too. You need a lot of people who need to step up, so it puts a lot of pressure on the hitters. But I do like this in theory if you can convert and get one more bat. So that's something to think about too. In terms of what you said, 6-man rotation, I'm not sure they're going to do that. I think maybe spot starts, like you said, with Martinez here and there. But I am kind of confused why they did the qualifying offer for him if you weren't going to make him a starter. So all the rumors we're hearing right now, they're still looking at starters. Maybe it's just checking in to see if they can get someone for really cheap. That good due diligence maybe. But you pay the guy over $20 million a year to be a reliever, that value doesn't add up, especially for a non-closer, but it doesn't add up whether he was a closer or not. So I think the 5 you listed at the start, when we have Hunter Green, Lodolo, Abbott, Singer, and Martinez is the plan. And then you have Burns and you have, Petty and you have Louder sitting there behind. That's kind of the plan B of like other teams have their starting rotation and they have all these guys who can fill in. I think that's what they're trying to do. But the way this makes it worth it for me is if you get and nab one of these big hitters that we're probably going to talk about coming up here. Otherwise, this might be, hey, we give up very few runs, but we don't win many games because we can't hit the ball.
Well, and that's what's interesting too is like who's going to be the leadoff hitter now, right? Like Indy was a pretty nice little leadoff hitter. He wasn't fast, but he got on base, right? So are they going to move McClain to the one spot, right? Are they planning on the guy that they sign being moved to that one spot? Do they not really care and they're just going to throw Ellie or even Spencer Steer there so he can see more fastballs, right? Like there's a lot of interesting things that I think that they're going to be able to do with this lineup. And I wonder if they're almost trying to like out big brain themselves, if this sounds, I feel like they're almost thinking about this in a very interesting way. I have to imagine that the person that they're going to go out and get is a better version of an outfielder of Jonathan India, and I think that's why they ended up making this trade. I also think that they were shopping Indy, and there have been a lot of rumors that the Royals had been wanting him for a while, and Singer was kind of the guy. I mean, we've heard Jonathan India to the Royals for the last like year plus, maybe. I think it was back to not this past trade deadline, but the trade deadline before that when he was injured. So I do think the Reds grab a guy who has shown to be able to be healthy, right? Which I think is extremely important. And I think he's a guy who, yeah, his ERA may bump up to like a 4.1 or a 4.2 in his first season here. I think, that will come down as time goes on, to be honest with you. I really do believe that. So I'm excited for him. I think he's really good. I think he does have number 2 stuff. And if you think about it with Martinez, the way he pitched last year as a starting pitcher, I think you have 1 ace, and I think you have 4 guys who could potentially be the number 2. That's going to be the battle I'm really interested to see. Hunter Green is probably going to start opening day. But who are going to be the 4 guys after Hunter Green, and in what order are they going to be, and who's going to be that number 2 guy for you? That's what's very interesting to me. And I think when it comes to Martinez, he did accept the qualifying offer, as Joe alluded to earlier, of like $21 million, I think it was, which was an insane amount. But I think the Reds knew that he's got maybe one more good season in him before he starts getting a little bit up there. I think he'll be like 35 this year, 34, 35, somewhere around there. And I think what he did for them is give them a lot of flexibility, and I think their payroll is going to be a lot more than we realize. Right now, they've only got, like, even with estimated arbitration, around $90 million in allocation, and they've already said that they are planning on doing as much or more than last year, which was, let me get it up here real quick. Sorry, it's taking a second, guys. Why is it taking so long to load? I don't know. Spot track. Okay, I'll come back to that here in a second. But the point is that they're gonna have money to be able to use, right? Maybe more than we realize. And so I think that we have the opportunity for them to maybe go out and sign some more people. And I think that a hitter is absolutely going to be top of that. Like, I think that's going to be like the number one person, the number one thing that they're going to be going for. And I'm very excited. Yeah, last year they had at least $100 million payroll. So even with the estimated amounts for arbitration, which will probably be a little bit less than what we expect, as it generally is, they'll still have about 13 to maybe 15, 20 million even to spend if they're going to be overspending the 100 million next year. So they've got the opportunity to still go out and get guys, especially now that they have that TV deal as well, kind of under wraps with, going to the MLB, at least for this year. If people didn't know, they are no longer going to be on Bally Sports, which is, I think, a good thing long-term, potentially a problem. Now we'll have to see how much money that's going to cost them, but from what it sounds like, they're not too worried about it. Maybe even the MLB is just kind of covering their expenses right now because of all the issues that they've had with it. We'll have to see about that. But I'm really excited about Brady Singer, Joe. I think that our rotation may be one of the best young rotations out there. I don't know if they're the best, top 5 rotations in baseball necessarily yet, but I think if everybody hits their peak or has a very good season at least, then I think they can kind of work their way into that top 5. And Terry's been on record already as saying that, like, I forget who it was who asked him this question, but they asked him, you guys are going out, you're getting a lot of pitchers. Is there, a specific type of, guy you're going for or whatever? And he said, look, man, like, pitching is so important. He's like, that's basically how I won my World Series, and I got, the Guardians to go to where they were, is we focused on pitching, and we see that with the Guardians even now. So if we can have the Guardians type of pitching, Joe, to where we've got guys that you can just call up out of nowhere who can come up and be guys that get a 3.5 ERA and blow everybody out of the water, then that's great. So the last thing I'll say too is I think our AAA pitching staff may actually be insane with Burns, Petty, and Louder. They'll end up lighting it up down there, and as soon as somebody gets injured, because we know Lodolo is probably likely to get injured at some point this season, they'll come up and fill in for his spot, and I think do a great job.
Yeah, this is all planning for at least 2 to 3 of these guys getting injured for the whole year. I mean, that's just
Hmm.
how baseball works these days. That's why teams put together two starting rotations. With Singer, you're going to get a guy who does a little bit of everything, and that is intriguing to me. I know I talked last year about how all the starters did something different. He's like the middle ground between all of them. He has some stuff, but it's not the nastiest stuff. He's going to be middle of the pack in terms of our starters for strikeouts per 9 innings. He's going to, give up some home runs, but not the most home runs
Yeah.
of the pitchers we have, starting pitchers we have. So I think, you're looking at like a 3 starter, maybe a 2, like you said, but a guy who, again, is different than the guys we have. And I think that's a good thing. And again, it's just now for me as a guy, I do really like the value of getting this trade done. It's going to put a lot of pressure on I think the hitters, one, and then two, depending on how they deploy these guys, if it really is, they want these guys to pitch 100 pitches from the start of the year, and like, hey, if they get tired, whoever that sixth guy is to step in and spot start, that's going to be huge. Or whoever the sixth guy is to when someone gets injured, is going to be huge for this team. And I still think there might be some of these starters we're talking about, Rob. Like, I think Graham Ashcraft is a shoe in for the bullpen now. At least he
Yeah.
should try. I don't. We'll have to see how he does in spring training, but like, there's no way he can start for this team ever again unless
No.
6 guys get hurt, 5, 6 guys. So, and it's probably a good move for him as well. So, I with a bullpen that is still remains to be filled. We have some guys who left, like Ian Jabot, and some other guys who are no longer with the team. Some of those starters are going to have to move to new roles. Let's see how they do in those new roles.
Yeah, I do still think they'll probably try to add another bullpen guy, maybe. I wouldn't even be surprised to see them go after a closer of some kind, right? Maybe even a cheaper one. We'll have to see who's going to be available. Because we'll head now into winter meetings and rumors, like in general. I don't think the Reds are anywhere close to being done with this roster, Joe, if I'm being honest with you. I think that there are a lot more things to go. They were actually one of the most talked about teams at the winter meetings in terms of teams that were checking in on people, teams that are planning on making moves, teams that are planning on doing this, that, and the other thing. Once the Juan Soto, absolute bonanza, him going to the Mets, by the way, if you didn't know, for some reason you're living under a rock, signed for an insane amount of money. Once that was done, things started to start happening, right? Over like a 36-hour span, which is what everybody expected. Most people were waiting to see how the Juan Soto, where he would go, how much he would sign for, all that kind of stuff. Now we're starting to see some of the signings, some of the trades starting to happen. I think over the next 3 or 4 weeks, we're going to see a lot more movement. I think maybe even over the next few days before Christmas, to be honest with you. I think that there will be a lot more moves made by all teams in baseball now that, the Soto saga is over. The Reds went out. We'll start with our Rule 5 draft. They ended up picking up a kid named Cooper Bowman from the Athletics. He was drafted by the Yankees in the 4th round. He was traded to the A's in, I forget which trade it was. I can't remember right now, but he was traded to the Yankees, or traded from the Yankees to the A's in a trade a year or two ago. As one of the better prospects for them. And he's hit pretty well for the most part throughout his career. Last year was his best season at Double-A. He hit 281, 12 home runs, 53 RBIs, 35 stolen bases. What I liked the most, though, was that it was 46 walks to 75 strikeouts. So a kid who's definitely going to walk more than, or walk a lot more than you might anticipate, and he keeps his strikeout numbers pretty low. He did struggle a little bit in AAA for Oakland. He hit 218 during that time period. No home runs, 17 RBIs, 12 walks to 37 strikeouts, about what he was already doing. But I think this kid has a little bit more to him than people realize. I really do. I think that he's not necessarily going to be a huge power hitter. He might hit like 8 or 10 home runs a year, but he's fast. It seems like he makes good contact, and he's got a pretty decent eye. I think, the Reds may be hoping that, I don't know exactly what they're going to do with him. I guess maybe he's an insurance policy for if they can't go out and find somebody. I don't love that necessarily, but in a Rule 5 draft to where the only negative is he goes back to the team. We saw that actually with Stuart Fairchild, if you remember, Joe. When they first got him, and then they found a way to trade for him later. It wouldn't surprise me that the Reds really like him enough they'll find a way to trade the A's for him and keep him on the AAA staff is where I think that this will end up going. But definitely a good, interesting, young player. He can play second base, shortstop, and he has some center field experience as well. He's only going to be turning 25 this season, so still pretty young, for the most part as well. So, and he's a right-handed hitter, by the way, too. That was probably the other reason why they took him. But you got any other thoughts on young Mr. Cooper Bowman here?
I don't think he's super impactful. I don't usually believe in taking players in the Rule 5 draft. It hardly ever works out.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's like it helps you get value. He currently is our 26th rated prospect on MLB.com. He's a guy who I think will probably end up going back to the A's, if I'm being honest. Maybe a trade, like you said. I don't know if a guy who has hit, I think, like 255 in his minor league career is a guy who's going to stay here. His good eye might be good. He might be like a depth guy. But for a guy that you have to kind of keep on the major league roster is not very, I don't know if he has what it's going to take. We'll see what they sign. But that, to me, Rob, I think the Reds aren't done this offseason. Taking a player in the Rule 5 draft really squeezes the numbers of what you can do. And I don't know how much more we got left in us, buddy. I think it might be one or two more players, and that might be it.
I still think that they'll do what they did last year, where they go after some unexpected bullpen arms. I'm not talking about big name players, to be clear. I do think they've got one or two more moves in them. To be honest with you, there are two that they have to do, which we'll go over here in a minute. But yeah, I don't know if this kid's gonna make it necessarily. I think he's an interesting depth piece. I will say his batting average has gotten better the last 2 years. Specifically, every time he's moved up, he struggles a little bit, and then he comes back and actually does pretty well. So I'm anticipating that they just see him as a potential option. I think that, maybe even Terry specifically was like, hey, I like the look of this kid. Let's just give him a shot and see what happens during spring training. And like you said, the worst that comes to worst is that you use the draft pick on a guy that you can just return and it doesn't really end up mattering. So I'm not too concerned about it. Yes, he takes up a roster spot for right now, but I think that that's more of an insurance option, if I'm being honest with you. I don't think that it's a very serious one. So let's get into the serious rumors then. There are two things that the Reds have to do. They need to get an outfielder of some kind, and they have to get a backup catcher because they do not have one right now. So we'll start with backup catcher right now. If you didn't know, Luke Maile is gone. A lot of people thought he might be joining the coaching staff, but I think he wants to try to play another year or two. I just don't know if that'll end up happening. I think he will eventually end up joining the Reds staff, whether it's with the Reds or in one of their minor league systems. A lot of people believe he's going down the coaching route, so good for him. We wish him the best. But right now, they're apparently looking at James McCann, who is an interesting option, Joe. I don't think that he's necessarily a great guy, but the Reds have done a really good job for many years. I mean, all the way back to getting Ramon Hernandez, even, of getting somebody to pair with their starting catcher who can come in and have an impact. For me, James McCann is that kind of guy, just depending on how much money they end up having to pay him. He's a former All-Star. He hit 18 home runs and drove in 60, had a 273 batting average about 4 or 5 years ago. Since then, he's kind of jumped around. He signed a pretty decent deal with the New York Mets. Didn't hit all that well for them. He's more of a 230 guy, but I think we would take that. If you remember last year, guys, that would have been one of our better batting averages for our couple starting players. I think he's a much better player, at least hitting-wise, than Luke Maile is. I don't know much about his defense, Joe. Maybe you do. But it seems like people seem to like him. He doesn't necessarily stand out to me necessarily, but I think that they're comfortable with Stevenson and they just want another guy back there who can do it, who's got a lot of experience. And James McCann is that, or James McCann, I keep calling him McCann because that's his nickname. But James McCann is that kind of guy. He did a good job for the Orioles last year and the year before. So I don't know. Where are you at with this potential rumor? I think he might be one of the best guys still available as well when you look at backup catchers.
Yeah, he's probably the best backup catcher we could get. I would love to have him on the roster because while we did have Ramon Hernandez being backed up by like Ryan Hannigan and some good guys way back when, it has been a while since we've had a good backup catcher here with the Reds that I think you can rely on. Kirk Casale, probably the first time he was around, probably the last time we
Yep,
had a guy that we really liked, and that obviously was 4 or 5 years ago now. So that's something to take in mind. I think he is a decent backup defensive catcher. I think he does good enough at putting the ball in play that I think he's an asset. And having a .7 WAR in 2024 as a backup catcher, where you're not playing every day, is pretty good, especially when you look at some of the WARs of our team last year of guys who did
exactly.
play a lot. So I'm a big fan of trying to get him. Um, Obviously, he's going to be pretty cheap. He's a backup catcher at this point in his career, but I think he'd probably the best option out there right now. Otherwise, you're probably just looking at like guys who either don't hit that well or have like a big hole in their game somewhere, or possibly like a AAA guy that you're just trying to hope can just play, I don't know, 40, 50 games and just kind of stick with it.
Yeah, I agree. I'm a pretty big fan of this. I would love it. I don't love his last contract was 4 years, 40 million. I don't think he's going to be getting 10 million a year from the Reds to be a backup. I think we'd expect maybe 3 or 4. We'll have to see. I think he'd be more inclined, obviously, to take a starting job, but I don't know outside of like an absolutely god awful team like Miami, if he would even want to take a position at a place like that to be a starter. He's getting up there in years, so he may not even want to catch every single day if he doesn't have to. So we'll have to take that into consideration. Now let's skip outfielders for right now, real quick, Joe. I want to jump back to pitching. The Reds are still looking for another starter. They were apparently very in on the option for Garrett Crochet. I think that the Red Sox just ended up being willing to give up more. They gave up 4 top 25, I think, prospects for him in their system, including, I think, their number 4 and number 6 guys. For the Reds, that would have been like some big names that you would know. Let me see here. The prospect lists. So this would have been guys like, well, Sal Stewart, who I don't think anybody would really care about, Tyson Lewis, Cam Collier, those kinds of guys thrown in with, I don't even know some of these guys, to be honest with you. Cooper Bowman, Adolfo Sanchez, those are some names I've heard of, I should say. So, or Cooper Bowman's, I think, the new guy we just got. So just kidding. Yeah, do know him. Point being is that I think that it was just too pricey for the Reds. Crochet had a great season, obviously, last year, but I don't know if he's going to be able to do it consistently. It was really funny because I put out a tweet, Joe, where it was like, this feels like the Chris Sale situation all over again, right? Going from the White Sox to the Red Sox. Feels like that was good. But the Reds have also been interested in Nick Pivetta, which is very interesting to me, mostly for the fact that Pivetta's not great. Like, he's never been a guy who's gotten an ERA below 4 in an entire season, but he does eat a lot of innings. So I guess maybe that's kind of what they are hoping for, what they are looking for. He is relatively cheap as well. 1 year, $7.5 million for the Red Sox last year. He started 27 games, and 2 years ago he started 33 for Boston. So he's not terrible, but he's not great necessarily either. I mean, he'd be the obvious 5 starter. I don't know if they'd be maybe looking at him as like a long relief type, situation in the bullpen, but the Reds are still going after more starting pitching. They're trying to build that depth, as we talked about, Joe. I just don't know if a guy like Nick Pivetta is worth it. And I don't know if looking at a guy like Garrett Crochet as well is necessarily worth it, because I don't think he would have re-signed with us anyway. So I don't know if they're just kicking the tires on these guys or how serious it is, but it keeps getting reported that they are looking at starting pitching.
Yeah, I think the Reds probably offered something fair. The White Sox just don't value our prospects as much as they did the Red Sox, which is actually kind of surprising. I'm pretty sure the Reds would have said, "Hey, we're not giving up Burns, we're not giving up Louder, we're not giving up Arroyo, we're probably not giving up
Yep.
Collier." But you could have like Sal Stewart, who's ranked higher than Collier. You could
Yeah.
have, maybe Chase Petty is part of the deal. Maybe 2 other guys lower down the rankings, and I think that would have been comparable to what the Red Sox offered. And I don't know. I don't still think they value our prospects as much as maybe we do, or as maybe as other teams do. Crochet would have been an absolute, again, steal of a trade. We would have had up there top 5 rotation in baseball. Obviously, can't compete with the Dodgers and some of the other teams who can afford 2 starting rotations, but we can be up there in the conversation. So I'm glad we were in on him, and again, feeling out for the value, even if we don't like absolutely have a need. The Pavetta thing is very, very odd. I think it's maybe just checking in and saying, hey, we may need an innings eater here. Our guys always get hurt. Our starters always get hurt, I mean, all 3 of our top young guys got hurt last year. And even if you go down to Graham Ashcraft got hurt too. So there's maybe some validity to that. Whether he wants to sign for a job where he may not be in the rotation to start the year, I don't know if that's going to be something he wants to do. Um, but I like the aggressiveness of doing this and maybe trying to get some cheap guys to eat innings, giving our injury problems. But again, all all things kind of lead to, with Nick Krall's comments, that there is a money crunch and that they don't know how much more they have to spend. And with this new TV deal, which again might be good long term for the league, but for short term for the Reds, it is bad because they're going to get squeezed with money. It is going to be very, very tough go afford niceties like having your 7th or 8th starting pitcher like Nick Pivetta come to this team. So in theory, good. In practice, when you have way less money this year because it's an MLB stream instead of the FanDuel or Bally stream, it's really gonna be tough. Really gonna be tough for these guys.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't heard much on how much it affects this year, to be honest, Joe. I know that they are concerned about potentially the future, especially if the Reds can't get another deal done specifically for for those rights. But if you, well, we'll have to see because I will be honest, I have read and heard that they have come out and directly said that like they're going to spend at least as much or more than last year. That was the quote from Krall that I saw even just yesterday when I was kind of doing my research again, which is again like they still have almost at that point they still have almost 20 to 25 million left to spend, and they're not going to be doing that, and that's after arbitration, by the way, at least projected arbitration. So that means you can at least go get one big guy at a minimum, right? In today's age of baseball, where guys are getting paid 50 million a year, so there are not everybody's going to be getting paid Juan Soto money, obviously. And that takes us to actually our outfield and just hitting options. They have checked in on Josh Naylor, who apparently the Guardians are very willing to move. I don't know where he really fits in with this because he kind of reminds me of just being a better Jeimer Candelario, which, if we're being honest, Joe, if the Reds were able to find a way to shed most of the contract of Jeimer Candelario and of Emilio Pagan, they'd have a ton more money to be able to spend. And we'll have to see if they do something like that. It doesn't seem likely, but we will have to see. Other names that they have checked in on are Luis Roberts, the big guy out of the White Sox. I'll be honest with you, I don't really want him now that I've looked at him, but we'll talk about that here in a second. Taylor Ward, who I think is actually a much more interesting option for me from the Angels, because apparently the Angels seemingly are very willing to move him, and also Lane Thomas, who was with the Guardians. So that's what we've heard about so far. Joe, who of these options do you like the most? What do you think of them? Where are you at with them?
Yeah, so I think Lane Thomas is the one I'd want the most. I think he has the most potential. I guess Luis Robert has maybe like some potential too, but he's really struggled as of late. It's hard to pin whether that's White Sox or him or what's going on. It would definitely be like hey, we're getting this guy and we have to work on him. Whereas Lane Thomas, I think, is still young enough and has that potential that would be the ideal move. I also think it's more likely that it happens because, as stated before, I don't think the White Sox see our prospects as good as we do, or as well as we do in terms of how much value they have. So maybe the Nationals are able to do that, or excuse me, the Guardians are able to do that. I think that he could improve. Obviously, last year was down, but the year before he had 268 batting average. I think it's way easier for him to come back from his problems than it is maybe for Luis Robert. So I think he's the most, out of the ones you listed, the most reasonable. Now, they are trying to go after guys. Again, I think the money deal. I think that this TV deal is very, very bad for this year because the money was taken out of their pockets for this year. I think they're going after guys on rosters and trying to do trades over free agents because of this. And just at that point, that's why they get all these young roster control guys. There's a chance they go after a free agent as well, but I would say Lane Thomas is my favorite out of these three.
Yeah, I'd agree. And look, let's be completely honest here. Luis Robert Jr. is the best of the three of them in terms of just pure raw talent. The season that he had in 2023, 38 home runs, 80 RBIs, 264 batting average, 20 stolen bases. He's a solid center fielder. And to be honest, his WAR is also the best of all of them. And it's really not close. The problem is, though, Joe, I'm going to read this off to you. Since his rookie season, 68 games, 98 games, 145 games, and 100 games. He has been injured a lot. I went and checked. He has been injured with something every single year since 2021. Whether it's a hamstring, whether it's a broken whatever, right? Like, this guy can't stay healthy. He is also the youngest of the three of them, specifically. But if you notice the trend, they're all right-handed outfielders that can hit, right? Like that's the goal. The thing is I Taylor Ward, I think, is more likely, if I'm being honest with you, and I don't mind him in a platoon role, especially. I think that they view him splitting time with the other left-handed outfielders. I think they're going to keep Spencer Steer in left field as well for most of next year. So I think there may be some platooning. But Lane Thomas is by far the best option even for that. He had a 3.3 WAR last year, that 268 batting average. He is still younger, 20, or it was 2 years ago, excuse me. He fell off pretty hard in Cleveland, but in Washington he had a pretty good season, even though he actually started off pretty rough in Washington, if you remember too. Like, I think he started off his season like 1 for like 22 or something like that. He was really struggling off the schneid, but he had absolutely no protection on that Nationals team around him. So he is the one who I'm most interested in as well, if I'm being honest with you. He's still pretty young. He's starting to hit his prime. Taylor Ward is in his prime. And Luis Roberts, if he can be healthy, can be an absolute stud. But I just also don't know if they'll be able to re-sign him. So we'll have to see what happens. You might be right. I just also don't know if there's much in the market, to be honest with you, Joe, of outfielders, right, in terms of like people who they would want to sign. I think that's part of the problem as well when you look at, MLB free agents, right? It's a very weird class right now, to say the least, especially when you look at outfielders specifically, because that's who they'd be looking at. We were not going to sign Tyler O'Neill for, 3 years, $50 million. Like, that would have been a way overpay for me. They don't want Conforto as a lefty. They don't need Austin Slater again. And they were never going to be in there on Juan Soto. The guy who I think everybody would love for them to go get is Teoscar Hernandez, but he's going to be way too expensive. He's going to be getting probably 20 to 25 million every season. I don't think that they value him that way. The only other one, and the only name that I think that they need to be talking about a tiny bit more, is Anthony Santander. I think the problem is that I think he's going to be way overvalued as well. I've heard mostly teams like the Yankees, the Red Sox, like all these teams that did not get Juan Soto are now going very hard after Santander and Hernandez, and I think that's just going to drive the price up beyond what the Reds are comfortable with. Eloy Jimenez is another name that you could look at. He's still pretty young, but he's been often injured as well. He was one of the big prospects that the White Sox liked, but I also don't think he can really play the outfield very well. So, you're kind of just scraping the bottom of the barrel here at this point. Like, you're not going to spend a bunch of money on Randall Grichuk or Connor Joe. And there were rumors, Joe, as well, of Jesse Winker coming back to the Reds. I don't know if you remember seeing that. That was like right at the beginning of the offseason. And then the last name I'll throw out there that's apparently an option, two, I guess. Michael A. Taylor, I've heard the Reds have at least checked in on at one point. But another name is Brian De La Cruz, not the brother of Ellie. He did have a very rough... He had a rough end of the season, but The Reds are apparently he could be a guy to look at, and Jurickson Profar could be as well. So there are names out there, Joe. There are people out there who would actually be less expensive than some of these guys that they're trading for, but they're just not to the same impact, I think, in terms of what the Reds would be looking at. So I guess I'll ask, do any of those other names really stand out to you? And if not, then I guess we're really all in on Lane Thomas at that point.
I mean, yeah, I'm cool. So at this point, we have a team full of guys who did not play well last year, right? Like you can say Ellie had a good year, and that's fine. Ellie's obviously prized. Everyone else didn't perform. So I am with you. It should be a right-handed hitter, but at a certain point, if some of these right-handed hitters get taken off the map, go get a left-handed hitter. If you get, say Jock Peterson for a deal somehow, that dude in this ballpark, we saw it in the 2015 Home Run Derby. That dude would kill. I'm not saying that's like the end-all be-all answer because we still need to hit left-handed pitching better. But what about like Randall Grichuk out of he played on pretty much every team at this point, honestly. But dude killed left-handed pitching last year. Why not put him on this team and platoon him and have see what he can do? Now he is a little bit older, going to be 33, 34 this upcoming season. But those are the guys that are reasonable, where they're kind of like lower down the free agent list that we could actually get. Because again, I don't know if we're going to get some of the guys higher on the list at this point, having already paid $21 million to Nick Martinez, and again, just not knowing how much they're going to be actually willing to spend. And if you put a lot of the eggs in the basket for this, then you don't get a relief pitcher maybe that you might want. So there's a lot of things to figure out. The fact that they want a right-handed hitter might actually play in their favor. There's a lot of guys who are either switch hitters or lefties that, again, like Jock Peterson, that maybe they don't need that other teams can sign and they won't care as much. But at this point, it is very much like, hey, winter meetings are over now. Nothing. Maybe this week something will happen, but then usually the holidays, not a lot happens for baseball operations. Once we get to like the 20th through the 31st, maybe the 2nd of the new year. I think if you don't have something figured out by like the 10th of January, then you start panicking and saying, hey, we need someone, whether he's a righty, whether he's a lefty, we might have to give up more money for him. If you want to win this year, that's what you got to do. If you don't, and you just say, hey, this is a building year, we're going to have kind of Terry get things right, then you can say, hey, we can just have these young guys develop. But I think the Reds fans are kind of ready for a winner. I think that's why Terry came here, because he thinks he can win too. So not yet panic time. You got about another month and a half before you really have to panic. But those are some of the guys I think on value they can get, and I would think would be pretty good fits.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think that they will. I will be honest with you. I am almost 100% sure that they're going to go out and get somebody. It's not going to be, again, it's not going to be like a freaking, I hate crapping on him so much, but Austin Slater, they brought in to hit lefties. He didn't hit anybody. So, they're going to go out and I think get a real guy who they can use. Then it's going to be a crunch. Who do you put where? What are you going to do with this team right from there? And I'm really excited to see how Terry Francona, does this. I think he's really expecting Matt McLain to come back and be healthy. I think we all are at this point, right? If he can't be, then I think we are in a world of hurt, especially without Jonathan India this year. I also think that they may be expecting Joe for Edwin Arroyo to maybe be available and take a step forward. I know he'll be probably spending time in AAA for the most part this year, but I think that they are going to call him up at some point this year when some of the inevitable injuries end up happening. And I'm really interested to see what he can be for this team. Is he a long-term, second base option for them? Is he somehow going to be able to move Ellie from shortstop to center field? Like, I don't really know what that's going to look like yet, Joe, but I am extremely interested to see kind of where this team goes from here. They've got the moldings of a very good team. They've got the coaching staff now, which I think provides that kind of base layer, that solid foundation. And beyond that, we'll have to see. I don't know. I love that they're attacking it with pitching. And I will be honest with you, Joe, I think this team will hit better this year. I don't know if it'll be markedly better, but it can't be much worse than last year was. Even Ellie, I think, was a little bit under the expectations, especially in the first 2 months. And we'll have to hope as well that they don't have to take 2 West Coast trips in the first 2 months that pretty much just end your season in May. I haven't looked at this, or we did look at the schedule. And I think most of their West Coast trips were like very well spread out, and I think they had like one at the end of the season that was kind of rough. But we'll have to see. There's still a lot more to go in baseball, Joe. Most of these teams still have not made enough moves. There will be moves made, I think, here over the next 10 days, like you alluded to. I think that there will be moves made in early January as teams and players stop their holdouts. And I'm really excited to see what the Reds are going to do. I think that they're going to make. I know I am the ever optimist, but I do think that they are checking in on a lot of people because they're trying to find what's going to be the best deal that makes the most sense for them because they know they have to go out and get somebody and they're going to get somebody. I don't know if I'm going to love who they get, but I just appreciate that at least Nick Kroll and company are trying, and they're trying to figure something out despite bad Reds ownership and unfortunate timing with a bad media company that is kind of bowing out of the scene entirely. And I'm excited to see this pitching staff, man. I feel like this pitching staff, along with Terry Francona, I think Terry's going to get a lot more out of these players than I think even you and I may end up realizing. And I think as long as they stay healthy, I think this team's going to be competitive. I think they're going to be very fun. And I'm really hopeful that they're competitive enough to the point where they get to the trade deadline and they're able to go out and get somebody for money that they are, able to afford. So those are my final thoughts. You got anything else, Joe? You got any words of wisdom to give us on the way out here?
Just one thing to wrap it up, and then two other notes. Like bringing back Santiago Espinal after he played well. I know the WAR wasn't there, but I think if you watched the games, he provided a lot more of small ball that we needed at a different time, hitting the ball to the right side. We talked about that a lot last year, so I won't dive too much into it. Bringing him back's good, but don't be surprised if we get a guy. Like I said, we need a right-handed hitter. Don't be surprised if we get, if it's mid-January, we don't have anyone. Pitchers and catchers report February 10th. It might be a guy who's a left-handed hitter. It might be a guy who plays first base that we're moving to outfield or something like that. It might be like an odd fit. I don't think they're too tied into, yes, they want someone to hit left-handed pitching, but I don't think they're too tied into position. So if we don't get something done by again, in the next month, it might be a weird signing that we have to move things together. And again, you just trust Tito to figure that out. Now, in terms of things to wrap us up, we did get the 9th pick in the next draft. I am not well versed on the next draft class. College baseball season hasn't happened yet.
Yeah.
Looks like another Holiday is going to go at the top spot. So that'll be fun for the Holiday family. And then 2, Dave Parker goes into the Hall of Fame.
Congrats.
A Cincinnati kid, a Red, a Pirate, a guy who, if you look at his career stats, maybe not the best, but if you look for like a short 3-4 year period, maybe one of the best hitters in baseball over that, maybe the most feared hitters in baseball. And I'm glad they're getting him in now. He's aging and hasn't always had the best health, but I think it's good to honor these players, especially we're putting less people in because of the steroid era. So going back and remembering a guy who won an MVP award, 7-time All-Star, won 2 World Series, and it's really good for the city of Cincinnati and Dave Parker himself. So wanted to point that out that the Cobra is getting in finally.
Yeah, no, I know a lot of people in Cincinnati are very excited. I know he's more remembered as a Pirate during that time period, obviously, but he did still play for the Reds as well. And from what I've heard, read, and seen, obviously really helped a lot of the younger other hitters that would come up with the Reds during that time period as well, and kind of get them ready to become what they were. So love that. But now I think that's gonna wrap it up for us on this episode, Joe. Like we said, we'll be coming back again. Don't worry, especially if there's like a big trade or a big signing. We were just both very busy during the Jonathan India and Brady Singer trade. That's why we were not able to get to this, but we're hopefully going to be able to get some more stuff as things happen. I do expect the Reds to go and make a deal. I just hope that if they trade for somebody like a Luis Roberts, my last words of wisdom are, don't give up too much. You're already getting relatively thin, but I do think their top 10, top 15 prospects are pretty good guys, and there are a few that are lesser known who are making their way up the prospect lists very quickly. So we will have to make sure that we keep an eye on them, but hopeful that the Reds will make some more good decisions and put themselves in an opportunity to win. We were very excited for last year and let down very quickly, Joe. I'm really hoping that this year is the opposite, that we are coming in with relatively low expectations, but the hope is that Terry Francona will be able to take them to greater heights than we had thought. So, that's going to wrap it up for us on this one, guys. So with that, we'll catch you on the next one.